Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. The topics discussed in this podcast will reflect my opinions and are not in any way to be regarded as medical advice.
It's often said that the best speech that politicians make is the one when they lose an election and no longer really need to make things up, and that's when you get the honesty coming out. And sometimes see that when politicians leave office as well. Apparently not confined to politicians. Former FDA chief wants the agency to focus on refined carbohydrates. They should be removed from the market unless industry can prove they're safe, David Kessler says. I don't know if he ever said that when he was the head of the FDA. If he did, I missed it, and certainly if they did, they didn't do anything about it. And again, as always, we'll put the article in the description. And I'm quoting now, former FDA Commissioner David Kessler, MD, says his citizens' petition to the FDA to remove refined carbohydrates from the market unless the food industry can show that they are safe is remarkably simple. Diet is the primary culprit behind this epidemic of chronic disease and metabolic harm. And these refined carbohydrates, these ultra-processed foods, are the main drivers. Hello? Kessler's Professor of Pediatrics, Epidemiology and Biostatistics at University of California, San Francisco, served as a commissioner under Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. So it's going back a little while. So this was in the late 80s and the 90s. And he's filed this petition on August 6. And I'll read this out verbatim. Requests that the FDA declare that it is no longer considers use of certain processed refined carbohydrates to be generally recognised as safe based on the likelihood that they contribute to metabolic harm. Promptly initiate proceedings to revoke any existing regulation for these refined carbohydrates. Inform industry that continued use of these products depends on industry notifying the FDA within 12 months of its intent to file a food additive petition. Remove these products from commerce unless their use in food is authorised by a food additive petition. Now, that's not going to happen. There's just no way that is going to happen. And to be fair, I don't think it needs to. We don't need to take all these foods off the market. What we do need to do as a collective is eat less of them. And that's a fairly simple thing. That is actually really, really simple. And the great thing about industry as against government is that industry is influenced by consumer and citizen behaviour. If we stop buying products and there's no profit in those products, or we significantly reduce the amount of products that we buy of a particular type, and they sell less of them and they make less money from it, guess what they're going to do? They're going to make less of them, or they may stop making them. And in the same way, if there are products that people want and demand increases, then they will make more of them and more variations will appear on the shelves. And, it's been estimated that some supermarkets have 45,000 different lines. Now, they wouldn't have that if there wasn't support for them. And, it could be argued that, we don't necessarily need, and this is not a food example, but it's a good one. We don't need 15 brands of washing powder necessarily. They're probably all going to be largely the same. I could stand corrected, but I don't think it will be. So how many different types of biscuits do we need? How many different types of breakfast cereals do we need? Not that many. But they are all being made because they are supported and they are profitable. And if we don't buy as many of them, then they won't be as profitable and they will go off the market. So I think here that Kessler is on the right track. It's taken him a while to get there, but look, give the man his due. And clearly the timing is prescient because RFK Jr., despite all his critics, has identified metabolic harm as a key driver of chronic illness. And in turn, one of the biggest drivers of metabolic harm is our collective diets. And that's not unique to the United States. Yes, there are rates of chronic illness such as diabetes and heart disease, and separate to that, rates of overweight and obesity are the highest in the world. But, there's a whole lot of other countries, including the UK and Australia, who are doing their bit to keep up. It's not a great thing to be doing. It doesn't reflect well on any of us, but it is what it is. And as we've spoken about in the previous podcast, a lot of this has come about since the introduction of the low-fat dietary guidelines in the early 1980s, and people, rightly or in this instance wrongly, believing what they were told by big public health, and the results are plain to see. And this was, you go back to 1970, there was no such thing as low-fat foods, because people had been scared off from eating products which had a fat content. And there was never a problem with this. In fact, there's been some other work out recently showing that lack of omega-3s in particular may be a factor in development of Alzheimer's, and also lack of omega-3s might have something to do with short-sightedness. I think that's probably less likely to be the case. But omega-3s and 6s to a lesser degree, we don't need as much of the omega-6s, are not called essential fatty acids for no reason. They're essential because the body can't make them, but the body needs them. And if they can't be made, then they need to be consumed. But that's a little bit of a digression. To get back to the changes in society over the last 45 years has largely come about from an explosion of intake in processed foods. When we have a low-fat food, the fat has to be taken out and something is put in its place. And if you read the labels, and yes, sometimes you need a magnifying glass, I get it. When you read the labels and you compare the sugar content to, for example, a low-fat yogurt to a full-fat yogurt, surprise, surprise, yes, one has lower fat, it's also got a higher content of sugar. And there's a processing that goes with it. And the more foods are altered from their original state, the further they are taken away from what the human body generally needs. Now, the argument about safety is a little bit fraught, because these foods are not toxic in that you don't consume them and drop dead. It's not like arsenic, right? And that's, obviously good. And people will say all these additives and preservatives are not toxic, i.e. they don't kill you. But over many, many years, if we're having too much of these foods, it is and has been shown that it contributes to chronic disease. So it's not the additive or the colouring or the preservative or the sugars that of themselves are toxic and leading to mortality, but they contribute to the development of diseases, and metabolic ones in particular. That includes type 2 diabetes, various forms of cardiovascular disease, potentially stroke, and that is what eventually can catch up with us. There's a lot of work linking ultra-processed foods to an increase in obesity and weight. There's a lot of this has been shown, and you just have to look around you to see that that's the case. And there's separate work being done on some of the artificial sweeteners, which claim there can be some health risks. And again, these are more longer term, so they're not immediately dangerous in inverted commas or toxic. But we're still better to drink water than to drink soft drink or any of the zero-calorie soft drinks, because yes, they don't have any sugar. That's a useful thing. And no, these artificial sweeteners are not immediately toxic, but they're not doing us any good. The body has no need for it. No need for it. If you get back to Prof. Kessler, how did we let this happen? He says, how did we engage in this processing of this group of substances, these refined carbohydrates, without understanding what the effects would be on our bodies? Well, it's because we had blinkers, and if it was low fat, it was good. It's a bit like Animal Farm, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good. for a while until that evolved. And I actually read the other day that the Animal Farm has reached its 80th birthday. It's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I recommend you do it. It's as prescient today, maybe more so than than it was when it was written. Just because these nutrients were allowed on the market in the 70s doesn't mean they don't have to continue to continue. Now, I don't think we need to get rid of them, as I said before, but as consumers, we can make decisions about what we put into our body. And ultra-processed foods, and Michael Pollan, the food writer, has a really good way of describing this. If you look at the label and you see a whole lot of numbers, it's a bit of a red flag. If you see a whole lot of ingredients that you would not otherwise ordinarily find, or might not find ordinarily in your pantry, that's also a red flag. So look, if you make a cake at home, you make some biscuits at home, yes, you're going to use some sugar. That's fine. A little bit of sugar is okay. Flour, eggs, butter, maybe some baking soda, some other ingredients. You'll find those in your pantry. The numbers of food additives go into the thousands. You don't typically find them in your pantry. And the more of them, the more it's becoming what might be described as frankenfood. Now, can we eat a little bit of this? Yes, you might be really busy. It's just been a hectic day. You haven't had time for lunch. You want to grab a protein bar or, use a protein shake. That is okay. But if we rely on these foods for most of our diet, it is not okay. And if we're having processed cereals for breakfast and highly refined breads for breakfast, and then we're having some highly refined bickies for morning tea, and so it goes, then we've seen the logical, and unfortunate consequences of those emerge over the journey. So, no, we don't have to ban them. Industry will be able to demonstrate that they're safe, defined as them not being toxic. It's a narrow, definition. A useful one. It's a useful one, don't get me wrong, but in this context, necessarily quite narrow. Industry will respond to consumers. If we, as consumers, demand different types of foods and we support fresh foods and we stop buying as much processed breakfast cereals and we stop buying as much soft drink, and yes, you can have it as a treat on Sunday, it's okay. But if we do this, then industry gets the message because they see it on their bottom line. We don't have to boycott anything. We don't have to picket anything. We don't have to protest in the streets. We just need to change our collective behaviours, because it was that change in collective behaviour that led us to where we are now, and we can lead ourselves out of where we are now. But it needs to come from the ground up. You're not going to get this from government. You're not going to get this from big public health. You're not going to get this from academia. You're going to need to make your own decisions, but the information is out there, and you don't have to believe me. You really can check all this out. But most importantly, look at pictures of people, crowd scenes from anywhere before the 1980s, and look at a crowd scene today and ask yourself what has changed. I think you know the answer. I'm not going to tell it to you again. This is something that you're going to know. And as an individual, it is within your capacity to change what it is you buy when you go food shopping, and it was in your capacity to change what you put into your mouth, and also to change, where applicable, what you recommend and put into your children's mouths. It is up to us.
Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and consider subscribing. Tell your friends. If there are topics you'd like to see covered, be in touch through the chat or email info@drjoe.net.au. We'll be uploading new content each Monday, and soon we'll be putting these videos out on X. You can follow me there at Dr. Joe's DIY Health.